So welcome to all of you who have braved the crummy weather to come out this morning and hear Lilly's refugee story. We're glad you're here. I want to give a special thanks to the Education Commission and the Outreach Commission of First Presbyterian Church who are hosting this event. Thank you. Most of us in this room, I'm guessing, have never had to face the need to flee from our homes and homelands. Yet forced migration has been a significant reality throughout the history of humankind. In our day, between 2021 and 2022, we saw the biggest increase in the number of people leaving their homes because they were forced to ever. At this moment in time, we have over 110 million people in the world who've been forced to flee from their homelands. Most of these are internally displaced persons. We call them IDPs. But over 35 million are refugees. And these are people who have had to leave their homes and cross an international border, and that's more than the total population of Texas. So that's not quite as many as California, but it's a lot of folks. In my Judeo-Christian faith tradition, there are many stories about people who had to leave and move on. Abraham, Lot, Joseph, Moses, and then we move on to Mary and Joseph and the baby Jesus, whose story we are celebrating at this time in the year. That young family had to flee to Egypt to escape King Herod, who was intent on killing all the baby boys. Before I introduce you to Lilly, we have a wonderful surprise for you this morning. We have Dinya and Sharon Hurtado with us, and I'm going to ask them to come up here and join me for a minute while I tell you a little bit about them. And then I think maybe Sharon's going to bring a brief message. Dinya and her family, I haven't had enough hugs from you lately. Dinya and her family left Colombia almost 5 years ago. And they lived for a long time in Ecuador. And then last May, after sitting all night and all day in the Charlotte airport, they finally got to New Bern through the sponsorship of IRM, which is our local refugee resettlement agency. That's Interfaith Refugee Ministry. First Presbyterian Church has been fortunate to serve as the church sponsor for Dinya and Sharon and Nubia and Miguel. We've been fortunate to provide them with a little bit of initial support and hopefully some friendship as they work to get settled in their new homeland. And I'm gonna, it's nothing like putting people on the spot, but Dinya is a full-time member of the workforce, and Sharon is knocking it out of the ballpark at New Bern High School. And so I'm gonna ask if you would like to just say hello or anything like that. Just, here you go.
And hi, everybody. I want to say thank you for everything, for your friendship and for all. That's so sweet. I don't speak English at all. And I want to say, I I want to tell a little bit of my history and why am I here in the United States. All started in 2019. My mom was a caseworker for a foundation that helped children forcibly subjected to the world of the drugs of the prostitution. And I was her assistant. I play with the children, I give them some classes, and everything was going well. And many children recovered and resumed their studies. But the gangs didn't like that. And we started receiving several death threats, but we ignored them. And the things got worse. One day, several guys came with weapons and told us that we have 2 hours to leave our house or they were going to kill us. At the time, I was in my dance classes and my mom called me on the phone, and you don't know how difficult it was to hear that the place where you grew up is no longer yours. And you can go back because your life will be over, be at risk. After all, we left our country, thanks to the foundation, and we moved to Ecuador, asking for refuge. Our process lasted 4 years, and they were not easy at all. But here we are, and we did not give up, and despite everything, and we are willing to move forward.
Thank you. Thank you. So, and now I want to introduce you to Lilly Krcmar. I met Lilly a few years ago through some activities at Faith Connection and also at Interfaith Refugee Ministry. Lilly is a remarkable human being. She's an artist. She has the tender heart of someone who cares for others. And her eyes sparkle when she talks about her volunteer work at IRM. She is still tutoring. And the story that I've heard is that Lilly has the most patience of all tutors, and therefore they give her challenging students, and she loves it. So Lilly is a busy lady. I've invited her to join me for church today, and she said, "Oh, I have another engagement. I'm going to meet with the Quakers and celebrate an Italian feast." So that gives you a sense of who Lilly is. She knows many people in many places. I found out from Lilly a few months ago, pretty soon after she celebrated her 90th birthday, that's 90, that she has never had the opportunity to tell her entire story. She's told bits and pieces, but not the whole thing. So my belief is that sharing and listening to the stories of other people is one of the most holy things we can ever do. So at this time, I want to ask you to help me welcome Lilly Krcmar to tell us about her life.
Thank you all for coming and for listening. I am dressed the way I am in honor of my grandmother, Boxapina, number JJ355, an indentured slave moved from Indonesia to work for the colonists in Suriname. So this is my kabaya, this is my sarong, and when I discovered my grandmother, I decided to give her a place in our family. I was born as Lilly Juta. At age 24, I took my husband's name of Krcmar, Krcmar. Although respectable, a liability of its spelling, causing much confusion. Now that I'm older, I'm known around here as Mr. Krcmar's mother. I guess still respectable. However, my name is not my identity, who I am. I am a product of colonialism, which shaped the first 17 years of my life. Since my experience is based on Dutch colonialism, I'll start my story with Suriname, where I was born, a small country nestled in the Amazon. Only 237 miles from the equator. Wild, untamed, some parts cruel, impenetrable, dark, mysterious, but sprinkled with a contrast of incredible bursts of color, orchids cascading down, life springing up everywhere, every second, mixed like the color of its people. Tragically, the original Arawak natives were quickly eliminated upon the arrival of the first colonists. And unfortunately, the many natural resources and possibilities Suriname offered needed humans to accomplish the goal of extracting all the dormant riches. And so started the first diaspora with the import of slavery from Africa, resulting with the beginning of the Maroons in Suriname. They stemmed from the runaway escaped slaves into the wild bush of the Amazon, finding solace into that dark, impenetrable, poisonous swamp where no master would follow. That failure of enslaved people brought on another diaspora of taking and moving human beings by force to develop wealth for the European owners. From India, mostly Hindustanis. From Indonesia, mostly Javanan Muslims. My grandmother, aged 26, taken from the village of Naganduk in Java. Boksapina, number JJ355, was one of many, uprooted and transported to another continent. Sadly, she caught the eye of the director of the sugar plantation, a Hollander, and as was so common, being at the mercy of their masters, my father was born, an embarrassment to the plantation and its owners. His mother named him Timor, but at the age of 4, when she died, it was changed to the more European-sounding name of Rudolf. His father, the director, died from a suspicious accident in the sugar factory. And Rudolf, after some years in a boarding school, was sent to Holland and educated as an engineer by the owners on the plantation to be recruited back to Suriname. I don't know if as a child I realized then the humiliation he often must have experienced from treatment, being banned from, entering, and much more, all because of color. But I find myself more often now remembering occasions which must have been so painful for him. I never heard him say one unkind word to those who treated him with contempt. My early childhood was being surrounded by a people of many colors, tongues, cultures, kindred spirits. It was carefree if I disregard most of the then tropical diseases I contracted. Malaria was common, but then there was dysentery, diphtheria, typhoid, and always the weekly removal of chiggers embedded in my feet, since wearing shoes was only for school. Fast forward to the end of World War II, the treaty barely signed. My father was to go to what was then East India, now Indonesia, another prized possession colony, which was worth more than Suriname, needed rebuilding, and so over 6 weeks of travel by freighter, sailing around the Cape of Good Hope, dodging floating mines, we arrived in what was then Batavia and is now Jakarta. I started my beginning as a teenager in a still war town, barbed wire enclosed Pasangrahan, once a fancy hotel before the war, now fallen into ruin and dirt. We were assigned a sleeping space among hundreds of others. Upon arrival, we were supplied with 2 empty mackerel cans to be used for our twice-a-day food ration, brought in by trucks, holding open barrels of rice and some kind of mush, with flies competing to be fed. Fortunately, with our luck, we moved away. Another freighter, 5 days of sailing to Ambon, a volcanic island, a jewel in the middle of the Celebes Sea. The next 4 years were spent living in a Quonset hut, left by the departing American allies. A quick explanation of what a Quonset hut is. Picture a half of a sheet metal overgrown cucumber. And do remember its location, metal in the tropics. School was on and off by mostly teachers just released from concentration camps. No books, pencils, desks, and in a building with half blown off walls and roofs. If it rained, you just moved to find a dry spot. Ambon, the most beautiful, magical volcanic island in Oceania, had been the most strategic prize in World War II, had gone through multiple vicious, bloodiest war fighting devastations. Oops. The Red Cross kept us fed with cans of Spam, sardines, preserved butter, condensed milk. One day, a shipment of dish towels, another gift from the Red Cross. My mother, a gifted seamstress, created a frilly sundress for me. Life on our small island, more or less cut off from the real world, was good for the next few years, until rumors started to penetrate and passing ships brought disturbing news from faraway islands. I paused on the beach to observe a tiny hermit crab moving along on the sand. Her home and everything in it neatly packed and secured on her back, moving on, and so must I. Like India before us, Indonesia wanted their independence, rightly so. Colonies had worn out their purpose and their welcome. But parting did not come smoothly, and so we had entered a civil war. Moving away from the idyllic life on Ambon brought us back to Java. In the middle of chaos, destruction, what once was my peaceful temporary home had turned into hate, fighting. I saw scenes that no one should see. The escape came suddenly, with nothing, everything, even papers, documents burned. 1,200 people embarked on an Italian ship, men to the right, women and children to the left. At my young age, it had never occurred to me that I had become a refugee. Holland was wet and cold, not welcoming to all those displaced strangers seeking a place to live and work. Understandably, a country the size of New Jersey, with more water than land, holding 13 million bodies of their own, was not ready to handle the situation created in the past by their own colonial actions. Culturally, it was not a good match. Brought up with rice, I learned to peel potatoes the Dutch way, a slap on my hand if the skin was thicker than paper. And so, the next possibilities began. Australia, Canada, the US, and Brazil offered immigration. US was the first choice, but the quota number was almost impossible to reach. Australia required a photo with the application. And because my father was brown, it was a quick elimination. Canada needed farmers. My father was an engineer. And so, once more, a freighter to Brazil. Different language and different culture. But you learn to adapt. And it became home for a few years, until my father received a phone call from the American Embassy asking if he was still interested in immigrating to the US. It had become a tradition, another freighter. My new home became Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, where I met my beloved, a political refugee from what was then Czechoslovakia, behind the Iron Curtain, who escaped by crossing a heavily patrolled and barbed wire border into Austria, made his way to the American Embassy to ask for political asylum. He was granted that status, and likewise he made his voyage by ship with other asylum seekers to the United States. Years later, our first refugee sat on our steps waiting when we returned from our honeymoon. It was never a question between us not to get involved with helping refugees. They came from Hungary, Slovakia, Poland, Uganda, Vietnam, Cambodia, and more. Our world is so painfully fragile. Helping refugees then was such a completely different system. Got instructions over the phone, which bus to meet, and hopefully, or by common sense, you knew the requirements. Our 5 children grew up with sometimes having their own room, or more often, finding themselves without the comfort of their own space and having to share beds or floors. But they inherently knew that that was going to be our life. And the stories and memories are there. My favorite one, Sarun Chak from Cambodia, his wife Kim Lee, 6 children whose names all started with Kim, and an old auntie. This was after I mentioned to František, my husband, that we needed a break. And he sheepishly appeared with our old station wagon on our driveway, with faces peeking from behind each window. Bethlehem Steel in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, where my husband worked for the research department, went sadly bankrupt. A long illness took his life. And as I pondered the way where to turn, I remembered the 2 men in my life who had the biggest influence on who I had become. My father, life is an adventure. My husband, when things come to a halt, we pack and we go. The decision was not too hard. In Pennsylvania, we had 6 long months of dreary sky, cold weather, compared to I had a son already in North Carolina. A new home, but welcoming. I'm so reminded over and over again, Mother Superior in The Sound of Music saying, when God closes a door, he opens many windows. And there it was, Interfaith Refugee Ministries. I had found and rekindled my passion. Working with or helping refugees keeps me grounded. I feel that I need them more than they need me. Just listen to their stories. We live in a broken world. There will always be refugees. It has become a family threat. My children, all 5 of them, are somehow connected to refugees, hiring, teaching, fundraising, and even housing. And so can you, if you are willing to reach out, get a bit out of your comfort zone. Thank you for listening. Oh, look out there, look. Look. Take it in. Take it in. This is not for me. This is for Bok Sarpina.
So we have a few minutes left for questions. And I would ask any of you who would like to ask a question if you would come up here and use the mic, because especially if you're sitting in the back of the room, it's a little hard. So Lilly would invite anyone who has a question or a comment. And if you don't want to come up front, you can just speak loudly from your seat. Yes.
Thank you, Lilly. That was wonderful. I'm wondering, you're still working on a memoir, right?
Well, this is my story. Memoir is a big word.
Okay, I'll say it differently. You are still working on your story, including things about your father.
Yes,
Yes,
especially
okay.
my father and my grandmother and my children. One of them, Mark, who's here, my
Mark,
son.
can you raise your hand? Stand up, Mark. Mark teaches at Epiphany, and the other thing, even more important to know about Mark, is that he's a great cook, and he's the main chef at the annual IRM fundraiser dinner on 5 continents. So glad that you're here, Mark.
And Amanda is here if you're interested to
Stand
go
up,
to
Amanda.
the...
Let people- Amanda is the volunteer coordinator at Interfaith Refugee Ministry and a good member of Christ Episcopal Church when she's not hanging out with Presbyterian.
I just wanted to say, Lilly, you have an eager audience waiting for more editions of your story.
Thank you, Deborah. Deborah was one of the first ones I met at Interfaith working with refugees.
Good morning. Thank
Good
you so
morning.
much for sharing your story. I think for most of us, it's something that's very humbling and unrelatable, thankfully. I have a new understanding of my beloved colleague, Mark. And I would love for you to have the opportunity to do a little bit of humble bragging about your children and grandchildren's accomplishments now that you've been able to make it to the United States where your family can have a new beginning.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I'm trying to teach my children, but my children know how I feel. But what I'm trying to teach my grandchildren is that it doesn't matter how much money you make, how much prestige you have, how big your truck is, as long, the most important thing is kindness to others who have less than we have. Thank you.
Anybody else want to say? Come on, Jim. I knew you would. Come on.
Yeah, my wife, my lovely wife, asked about the accomplishments of the children and grandchildren. Well, my children, one was taught by your son, Mark, and one is currently being taught by your son, Mark. They sometimes can be naughty. I'm wondering if you can tell us some stories about Mark being naughty when he was a boy.
Well, no, Mark shared often his space. I have 5 children. The 3 boys had their own space. But often they had to move away to make room for a refugee family. And at that time, sponsoring a refugee family, you pick them up from the bus. First thing still to do is get your social security number. And then eventually find them a house, a home, and a job. And but no, Mark and his 2 other brothers were often, I talked about the auntie, well, she was a tobacco chewing older lady from Cambodia, and she liked to spit. They liked to play soccer in the backyard, so they were dodging the spit from old auntie.
I think Jim was fishing for something more, Mom.
No, but they're still, as I said, all of them involved with refugees. The recent one was Marina, my daughter, who housed refugees, 2 families from the Ukraine. And I think Amanda set her on the right path how to go about it, right? So these agencies are very important in our community, how to help. Ooh.
Any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
Your story, as we've already heard, is humbling and amazing. For many people, the thought of welcoming a refugee family into their home seems like a lot. How would you encourage someone who wanted to get started working with refugees? What are some initial steps they could take? Some starter working plans.
Well, first I must say,
Hold the mic close to your mouth.
I grew up in colonialism, which is not normal. I also grew up with people from India, Indonesia, Africa. So I was immersed as a young child in different cultures, accepting people how they are. Now in this country, it's a bigger step because you're not used to working with different cultures. But I think as long as you have a kindness to help people, that's the most important thing. You don't need knowledge. You don't need a lot of money. All you need is kindness.
That's a good answer, Lily. So, while we're waiting to see if anyone has a last question, I want to point out that on the table near the entrance, there is a tapestry piece that Lily made. And some of you already know that in August, the Bank of the Arts, which has displays and exhibits, exhibited Lily's her tapestries for a month. And so the tapestry that's back there is actually one called Stranded, which is the story of what it's like for refugee women sometimes when they get isolated and stranded in the new land. Take a look at it and know that it will be on display in the lighthouse here on our campus.
A little bit on the talk. I'm not a feminist, I'm a womanist. And so I have strong feelings for the women refugees. The husbands get a job. the children go to school. And there's the woman, isolated at home, having to create meals, a family. And so that's why the stranded tapestry is about women.
Okay, I think we're gonna wrap up now, and I want you all to know that Lilly, it does have another event in a little while. But can stick around for a few minutes, and so if any of you would like to come up and say hello to her, that would be wonderful. Do take a look at the beautiful tapestry artwork that's on the table, and thank you so much for coming. Let's give Lilly one more.
Thank you so much. And a short note, I love cultures, and my son there sits with 3 Filipino teachers recruited to help in this country because we don't have enough teachers and medical personnel. But